Hello, Dr. Watson here with another video doing a deep dive into marketing fundamentals. Today we're going to talk about the product portfolio. I was so excited after the last video. I had a question sent in, and the predicament that they were facing was the brand has experienced massive growth for the last 5 years, but now that growth has begun to slow, and they are in a very competitive product category. There's also been some inflationary pressures that has caused price increases, but now the leadership doesn't understand why the growth isn't nearly as significant, double digit, the way that it had been in previous reporting periods. So this person was like, how can I address this issue with my leadership? So I do want to go ahead and use some more marketing fundamentals to help answer this person's question, and also go ahead and continue diving into why Netflix maybe wasn't as good as a bet as Bill Ackman thought whenever he made that $1.1 billion purchase and then wound up selling it for a $400 million loss just 3 months later. Anytime you are examining your product portfolio, you really need to address what in our product portfolio is actually driving revenue. So if you are creating new products and those new products aren't actually revenue generating, then you're going to a lot of expense and you're using company resources, both in time, energy, and actual cash capital, and you're not doing anything that actually produces additional revenue. This was really the position that Netflix had found themselves in, right? So whenever they're creating all of these new series, so they had a product portfolio problem in terms of they didn't own a lot of the content. They were licensing content from other studios and other production companies. And because of that, they didn't have any control over that. And so frequently titles and really popular shows that people liked, that people were willing to pay a subscription for, those titles may actually go away and Netflix would no longer have the capability of showing them or streaming them because the original production company would pull those rights. And so this happened a lot as other studios and other brands like Disney and Paramount that already had all of these assets, and then they decided they wanted to build their own streaming network. Well, all they had to do was pull their original content from Netflix's platform to start populating their own. So to address this situation, Disney was really the first one. Now this goes all the way back to like 2011, 2012, whenever Netflix first lost the rights to stream Disney content. So at that point, they said, in order to address this really big weakness in our product portfolio, we as Netflix are going to create our own studio and we are going to start creating our own content. Okay, well, strategically, that seemed like a really great idea in terms of if you don't have control over what is your core product that you are selling, then you need to take some strategic actions in order to gain control over that. So that's what they did. They said, okay, we are going to open a studio, we're going to hire writers, and we are going to own the rights to these so that nobody can ever take them off of our platform again. The problem with that is that they soon found out it's very, very expensive to create quality programming, and their product portfolio wasn't designed in a way, and their distribution model wasn't designed in a way that each new show that they incurred the cost to produce, it's not like it created an infusion of cash or did a big revenue bump, because they didn't charge any extra as each new product or each new series was created. So it cost them a lot of money, but it didn't actually do a revenue bump because it's not like they were doing theatrical releases like Disney was still doing. So Disney would spend a lot of money to make a Marvel movie. They would actually release that Marvel movie, to theaters. So there would be this bump in revenue that would help offset the cost of making it, and then they could add it to their streaming platform for all those who have just been paying a steady subscription price. Netflix, on the other hand, they would make expend all of this capital creating something, and then no bump, right? No bump in revenue. And so because of that, I really want to dive into, there are a couple of matrices that we use to analyze a product portfolio. The first one is called the BCG matrix. And the BCG matrix is comprised of 4 quadrants. And the axes are determined by the potential for market growth and current or potential market share. So I have an image of the BCG matrix here, and so you can see that it's pretty easy to grasp the concept of a question mark, a star, a cash cow, or a dog. Now, whenever a product goes into this matrix, it is never a permanent state. And the reason it isn't is because of that product life cycle that was talked about in the last video. So if something starts out as a question mark, usually that's because it's at the very beginning of the product life cycle where it's just in its introductory phase. And it's during that time whenever something is a question mark, it definitely doesn't have very much market share currently, but there could be potential for a lot of market growth. And so you have to do your analytics, do your market testing and research in those very early days after introduction, or even prior to introduction, to try to determine, is this product, is this question mark worth us investing more to be able to push this to the star category? All right, so again, nothing stays in any of these quadrants permanently. Instead, the strategic decisions that the company makes is going to determine what happens and where these move. So you would hope that a question mark with the correct investment and research will become a star. What does that mean? The star is kind of this beloved, idealized position where it is a product that is in that growth phase. It is experiencing high market growth. You are increasing your market share. And so because of this, these are like those products that every brand manager hopes to have in their portfolio, where it is just kind of living easy. Like I said, your reports are awesome. You have those super great, revenue quarters where it's just all systems go. Everything is growing. You are gaining market share, all good. But we know that you cannot stay in this position forever. And so what either happens is, as the product matures, then it drops down in the quadrant to becoming a cash cow, which means you still have a lot of market share, but there just isn't really a lot of room for market growth because you've already captured it all. And so again, this goes back to what we talked about with Netflix, where there are no more customers left to sign up. They were already successful in going from a question mark whenever they first released to a star where they're putting Blockbuster out of business and the business is just booming and growing pretty much exponentially, to then you have market saturation, increased competition, and during that maturation stage, whenever you're peaking on that product life cycle, is when you have a cash cow. So market share, profitability peaks, but then you have to prepare for the inevitability that it becomes a dog, which means there is no market growth and market share begins slipping as well. Then you have to determine, once you have a dog in your portfolio, how do we either start the product life cycle over again, or we divest ourselves of this brand, we let it go, or we phase it out. If you think about Apple and their iPod, the iPod is a perfect example of moving through this cycle. Man, the iPod was an absolute star for a long time. I mean, it revolutionized the music industry and the music listening industry. It became a really big cash cow for Apple. But if you look at their product portfolio now, they hardly do anything with the iPod. They still own that brand, but it's a dog in their portfolio that you can still purchase one, but it is nowhere near as big of a piece of their overall revenue or portfolio as it had been in the past. Instead, they had to come up with new products to be able to introduce. So they started introducing things like the watch, the Apple Watch, and they also interesting, they just would introduce new sizes of the iPad. So you have the mega iPad, and you have the little iPad, and you have the regular iPad. But that was a way for them to be able to start the product life cycle over as products are moving through this BCG matrix. Now, one way that you look at that and to analyze what strategy are we going to use is called the Ansoff matrix. So you can see it here. I have the Ansoff matrix, and its quadrants are determined by markets and products. So if you have an existing product, one way that you can start the product life cycle over again is by introducing it to a new market. Okay, so if you have, say you have a direct to consumer or a B2C product, one way that you would be able to start the product life cycle over again with the same product would be to actually introduce it possibly to a B2B market. A good example of this, so the beverage industry is very, very competitive. But if you are selling products directly to consumers in the beverage space, one thing that you would be able to possibly do is take that product and then repackage it or begin targeting, say, the hospitality industry. So instead of just consumers buying and consuming it, you could maybe go after hotels so that in their continental breakfast, or maybe even in the rooms, whenever they have like coffee or teas inside each room, if you could secure some contracts in the B2B space in hospitality, that would be a way for you to take a current or existing product in your portfolio, but develop a new market in order to expand or start the product life cycle over again once you begin to experience that maturation and inevitable decline. Another option that you have is you can obviously develop new products. And the one thing that you really have to worry about or be very mindful about, this was Netflix's approach. They were like, oh, well, we're just going to start introducing an ad tier, and we're going to consider this advertising tier in our subscription to be a new product. Well, in that instance, you have to worry about market cannibalization or product cannibalization. And that happens where basically a new product that you introduce to your existing customer base, it doesn't make them buy anymore. Instead, the new product eats away at the market share of the customer base of the existing product. So, with the example of Netflix, obviously, instead of current customers on the non-ad tier, they're not going to also add the ad tier. So it's not like you're going to get two sources of revenue from them. Instead, you may just have a lot of your existing customers who will change their subscription base to the new lower priced ad tier. So all you've done, yes, you've introduced a new product, and that new product has a revenue stream attached to it with the advertisers, but it also has some product cannibalization that can take place. And with the launch of their ad tier, it did not go very well for Netflix. They actually made guarantees to their advertisers of how many people would be tuned in for viewership. So they made viewership guarantees, and they priced their ads and their contracts based on those viewership guarantees, and then they did not meet them. So they were actually having to, in some instances, they were actually having to refund their advertisers for not meeting those viewership guarantees. Or instead of additional revenue coming in, instead of actually refunding them, they were just extending the contract, but with no new money coming in from the advertiser, because they basically had a credit for the money that they had already paid for guaranteed eyes and customers that weren't there. And so they extended the terms of the contract, but with no new revenue generating funds going to Netflix. And so you really have to be mindful when we are developing new products and giving them to an existing market. Are we actually increasing our margins, or are we actually increasing the amount of purchases, or are we simply cannibalizing from our current customer base? So those are some decisions that you really need to think through with your leadership team. The third category of actually doing something new is going to be diversification. And that's where you're going to make a new product and you're going to take it to a new market. The brand that I like to use for this example is Google. Google had done as much market penetration as they possibly could with their search product, right? So the search engine was absolutely maxed out in terms of market penetration. That existing product and that existing market, there was no more room for growth. So instead, Google began branching out. Amazon has actually done this really, really well as well. I don't know if you know what all Amazon does, but Amazon now owns, they recently acquired like a healthcare company. And so you can diversify either through acquisition, right? So you can go out and you can buy other companies that that fill the need that you would like to, or fill the hole that you would like to in your product portfolio, or you can grow those resources from scratch and develop those new products. So Google, whenever they introduced the Google Pixel phone, that was truly a new market and a diversification strategy for them. Entering, the cell phone market, whenever they had just been a software company, that was kind of really a big step for them. And we could argue the successfulness of it or not, but it has been much more widely successful than like Meta and the Facebook portal and Meta's foray in trying to diversify into actual hardware. And so the Google Pixel is a good example of diversification. So I hope that this helps. Once you are at the peak and beginning to experience that decline that is just inherent and inevitable in the product life cycle, then you really need to look at the Ansoff matrix and you need to say, okay, what strategy can we use? It's going to be very costly and frustrating if the only thing you decide to do is market penetration. If you are not growing your market, or if you're not introducing new products, it's going to be really hard for you to experience the growth that your leadership is probably going to require. So one of the other strategies, product development, market development, or diversification, is something that you're going to want to consider. So tune in next time where we will talk about more marketing fundamentals.